The desert wind had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust across the highway. Jake Morrison and Kyle Bennett stood in the harsh glare of the federal vehicle's headlights, facing a decision that would determine the rest of their lives. The conversation had moved far beyond a simple traffic stop into territory that challenged everything they thought they knew about the world. Agent Carter checked her secure communication device and frowned. "Colonel Washington, we have a problem. The delay tonight has pushed us beyond our safety margin for tomorrow's diplomatic meeting. Command is requesting immediate authorization to proceed with emergency protocols." Henry Washington's expression grew serious. "What kind of emergency protocols?" "Direct orbital insertion of the communication equipment," Agent Carter replied. "We bypass normal security procedures and have the equipment delivered directly to the meeting site by alien transport. That would expose alien technology to civilian observation," Henry said. "The protocols exist for good reasons." "Command is aware of the risks," Agent Carter said. "But they consider the diplomatic meeting more important than maintaining absolute secrecy." Jake stepped forward. "This is because of us, isn't it? Because we delayed you?" Henry looked at both officers thoughtfully. "Your actions tonight started a chain of events that will have consequences for years to come. The question is what kind of consequences there'll be." Agent Carter's device chimed again. "Colonel, Command is requesting your immediate input on the emergency protocols. They need your decision within the next 5 minutes." Henry walked a few steps away and activated his own communication device. Jake and Kyle could hear him speaking in low, urgent tones with someone who was clearly high up in the chain of command. "Understood, General," Henry said. "But I recommend we proceed with standard protocols regardless of the time delay. The long-term risks of exposure outweigh the short-term diplomatic advantages." The voice on the other end spoke for nearly a minute without interruption. Henry listened carefully, occasionally interjecting with, "Yes, sir," or "Understood." "General, with respect, sir, the officers involved in tonight's incident may represent an opportunity rather than just a problem," Henry finally said. "If they're willing to undergo integration training, they could become valuable assets for future operations." Kyle whispered to Jake, "He's defending us, after everything we did to him." Jake nodded, feeling a mixture of shame and gratitude that was difficult to process. Henry finished his call and returned to the group. "Command has agreed to proceed with standard protocols for tomorrow's meeting, but only if we can guarantee that tonight's security breach won't be repeated." "What does that mean for us?" Jake asked. Agent Carter pulled out the handcuffs again. "It means you have 30 seconds to decide: federal prosecution or integration training followed by assignment to special law enforcement units." "If we choose the training," Kyle said. "What exactly would we be doing?" Henry answered before Agent Carter could respond. "You would become part of a very small group of law enforcement officers who handle situations involving alien contact. Missing person cases that are actually alien abductions. Technology theft cases involving stolen alien equipment. Immigration issues involving alien refugees who are living under assumed human identities." "There are aliens living on Earth?" Jake asked. "About 3,000 of them," Agent Carter confirmed. "Mostly refugees from worlds that were destroyed by the harvesters or species that were displaced by other conflicts. They live quiet lives, work normal jobs, and try to blend in with human society. And sometimes local law enforcement encounters them without knowing what they're dealing with," Henry added. "That's when officers like you would be called in." Agent Carter checked her watch again. 15 seconds, gentlemen. What's your decision?" Jake looked at Kyle, then at Henry Washington. The elderly man who had remained calm and dignified throughout the entire encounter, even when they had treated him with suspicion and disrespect. The war hero who had saved humanity from extinction and was still working to protect Earth's place in the galaxy. "We choose the training," Jake said. "Both of us," Kyle added quickly. Agent Carter nodded and put away the handcuffs. "Very well. You'll be transported to a federal facility for debriefing and initial evaluation. If you pass the psychological assessment, you'll begin a 6-month training program." "What happens if we don't pass the assessment?" Kyle asked. Then you'll be charged with the federal crimes and face prosecution, Agent Carter replied bluntly. The psychological evaluation isn't just about your capabilities. It's about whether you can truly change your thinking patterns. Henry Washington approached both officers and extended his hand. Gentlemen, I want you to understand something. What happened tonight wasn't just about you stopping me. It was about the assumptions you made and the prejudices you acted on. Jake shook Henry's hand, surprised by the strength of the older man's grip. Sir, I want to apologize. We were wrong to stop you. Apologizing is a start, Henry said. But apologies don't change the underlying thinking that led to your actions. That's what the training program is for. Henry reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a military challenge coin. But when he handed it to Jake, the metal felt warm and seemed to pulse with a faint energy. This is a communication beacon, Henry explained. If you complete the training program successfully, you'll be given a permanent one. It connects you to a network of humans and aliens who work together to maintain peace and security on Earth and beyond. Kyle stared at the device in Jake's hand. We could actually be part of all this? The space program, the alien contact operations? If you prove that you can see beyond surface appearances and treat all intelligent beings with the respect they deserve, Agent Carter said. The galaxy is full of species that look nothing like humans. If you can't overcome your prejudices about humans who look different from you, you'll never be able to work with alien allies. Henry walked back to his motorcycle and began putting on his helmet. Officers, I want to leave you with one final thought. During the war, I fought alongside soldiers from every race, religion, and nationality on Earth. I also fought alongside aliens whose appearance would give you nightmares. He paused and looked directly at both officers. Some of the bravest soldiers I ever knew were beings that looked like giant insects. Some of the most brilliant tactical minds belonged to creatures that resembled jellyfish. And some of the most honorable individuals I ever met were aliens whose skin was bright purple and who communicated through changes in electrical field. Henry started his motorcycle, and the engine rumbled to life with a sound that seemed somehow different from a normal Harley-Davidson, deeper, more complex, as if the machine contained technology that didn't belong in any earthly vehicle. The universe is vast and strange and wonderful, Henry said over the engine noise. But you'll only be able to see that wonder if you learn to look past your preconceptions about what belongs where and who belongs with what. Agent Carter motioned for Jake and Kyle to get into one of the federal SUVs. Transport to the facility will take approximately 2 hours. Use that time to think about whether you're truly ready to change the way you see the world. As the officers walked toward the vehicle, Henry called out to them one more time. Gentlemen, remember this. The aliens who attacked Earth 20 years ago made the same mistake you made tonight. They looked at humanity and saw only what they expected to see. That kind of thinking cost them a war, and nearly cost them their entire civilization. Henry revved his motorcycle and pulled back onto the highway, heading toward whatever mission awaited him in the darkness ahead. The federal agents loaded their equipment and prepared to follow him, leaving Jake and Kyle alone with Agent Carter. One more thing, Agent Carter said as they reached the SUV. If you successfully complete the training program, you'll be sworn to secrecy about everything you've learned tonight. But you'll also be given responsibilities that most humans can't even imagine. Jake looked back at the highway where Henry Washington was disappearing into the distance, his motorcycle's taillights growing smaller against the vast Arizona night. Agent Carter, what would have happened if we had just let him go? If we hadn't stopped him? Agent Carter smiled slightly. Then you would have remained ordinary police officers for the rest of your careers, never knowing that heroes like Colonel Washington exist, never understanding that humanity's greatest adventures are still ahead of us. She opened the SUV's door and gestured for them to get in. But you did stop him, and because of that choice, you now have the opportunity to become part of something larger than yourselves. Whether that turns out to be a blessing or a curse depends entirely on what you do with the opportunity. As the federal convoy pulled away from the highway, heading toward a future that neither Jake nor Kyle could have imagined a few hours earlier, the Arizona desert returned to its ancient silence. Above them, stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations continued their eternal dance, And somewhere among those stars, the representatives of 12 alien species prepared for a meeting that would determine humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. Henry Washington walked back to his motorcycle and retrieved another item from the modified storage compartment. This time it was a small metallic cube that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. When he held it up, both officers could see that it was covered in symbols that definitely did not originate on Earth. "Officers," Henry said, "before you make your decision about the training program, I want you to understand exactly what humanity accomplished during the war. This is a memory core from a captured Harvester command ship. It contains their assessment of human military capabilities." Agent Carter produced a small device that looked like a cross between a tablet and a projector. When Henry connected the alien cube to it, holographic images began to appear in the air above the device. The images showed star maps, ship formations, and what appeared to be battle reports written in an alien language. The Harvesters were a species that had conquered 43 different worlds over a period of 2,000 years, Henry explained. They had never encountered serious resistance from any species they attacked. Their standard invasion protocol was to demonstrate overwhelming force, demand surrender, and then harvest the planet's resources and population. The holographic display showed images of other planets that had been conquered by the Harvesters. Dead worlds stripped of all life, massive industrial complexes built from the remains of alien cities, and populations enslaved or worse. It was like looking at humanity's potential future if the war had been lost. When they first arrived at Earth, Henry continued, the Harvesters expected the war to last approximately 6 weeks. Their analysis showed that humans had no unified global military, limited space-based defenses, and technology that was centuries behind their own. Agent Carter touched a control on the device, and the holographic display changed to show Earth as the Harvesters had first seen it. The planet looked vulnerable and isolated, with only primitive satellites and a few small space stations marking humanity's presence beyond the atmosphere. But the Harvesters made 3 critical errors in their assessment, Henry said. First, they underestimated human adaptability. Second, they failed to account for human creativity under pressure. And third, they never understood that human diversity was a source of strength rather than weakness. Jake watched the holographic images change to show the first battles of the war. Human ships that looked crude and improvised compared to the sleek Harvester vessels, but they were moving in patterns that seemed to confuse and frustrate the alien forces. "Tell them about the Luna Station battle," Agent Carter suggested. Henry nodded and manipulated the holographic display to show a large space station orbiting Earth's moon. 3 weeks into the war, the Harvesters surrounded Luna Station with 40 warships. They demanded surrender and gave the station's commanding officer 1 hour to comply. "What happened?" Kyle asked, despite himself becoming fascinated by the story. "The commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos," Henry replied. She had grown up in the slums of Mexico City and joined the military to escape poverty. The Harvesters assumed that someone from such a background would surrender, rather than face hopeless odds. The holographic display showed the space battle that followed. Human ships that were clearly outmatched began to move in seemingly random patterns around the Harvester fleet. Santos used a tactic based on a game she had played as a child in the streets of Mexico City, Henry explained. She scattered her ships and made the Harvesters chase them, but each pursuit led the alien ships into carefully planned ambush positions. "Street fighting tactics in space combat?" Jake asked. "Exactly," Henry said. The Harvesters had studied the military academies and war colleges of Earth. They understood traditional military strategy, but they had never encountered tactics developed by someone who learned to survive by outwitting street gangs in urban warfare. The holographic display showed Harvester ships being lured into asteroid fields and debris clouds where human forces could use superior knowledge of local conditions to gain tactical advantages. Santos destroyed 12 Harvester warships and captured 3 more before the alien fleet retreated, Agent Carter added. "The captured ships provided us with the technology. We needed to upgrade our own fleet." Henry changed the display to show another battle, this one around a red dwarf star. The Battle of Wolf 359 was won by Captain James Park, whose parents had immigrated to America from South Korea. Park used tactics based on traditional Korean military strategy, combined with techniques he had learned from playing video games. Video games? Kyle asked incredulously. Real-time strategy games, Henry confirmed. Park realized that commanding a space fleet was similar to managing resources and units in a complex video game. He developed formations and maneuvers that no traditional military academy would have taught, but they were devastatingly effective against alien forces. The holographic images showed human ships moving in intricate patterns that looked almost like a dance, surrounding and isolating harvester vessels before destroying them with coordinated attacks. The harvesters kept losing battles because they couldn't predict what humans would do next, Agent Carter explained. Every human commander brought different cultural backgrounds and experiences to the war. The aliens would analyze one human, tactical approach, then encounter a completely different approach from the next human commander. Henry manipulated the display to show a graph of battle outcomes over time. For the first year of the war, the harvesters won 60% of engagements. But as human forces adapted and learned from each battle, that percentage began to reverse. By the end of the second year, humans were winning 80% of all battles. What changed? Jake asked. Humans started working together instead of just defending their own territories, Henry replied. American forces shared intelligence with Chinese forces. Russian scientists collaborated with Indian engineers. African tactical innovations were adopted by European commanders. The diversity that the harvesters saw as a weakness became our greatest strength. The holographic display now showed the final battle of the war, a massive engagement around what appeared to be an artificial structure in deep space. The Battle of Harvester Prime, Henry said quietly. The Harvester's main military base located in a system 800 light-years from Earth. The final human assault was commanded by a joint task force that included officers from 47 different nations. Agent Carter activated another control, and the officers could hear audio recordings from the battle. Voices speaking in dozens of different languages, all coordinating a single massive assault on the alien stronghold. No other species in galactic history had ever mounted a successful assault on a harvester base, Henry explained. But humans didn't just assault it. We captured it intact and used their own technology to establish a permanent human presence in deep space. The holographic display showed human flags being raised over alien structures, and human soldiers working alongside alien allies who had joined the fight against the harvesters. When the war ended, Agent Carter concluded, 47 alien species immediately requested alliance treaties with humanity. Not because of our technology, which was still primitive compared to theirs, but because of what we had demonstrated about human character under pressure. Henry disconnected the alien cube from the projector, and the holographic images faded away. Officers, that's the reputation humanity has earned among the stars. We're known as the species that never gives up, that finds solutions where others see only problems, and that grows stronger through diversity rather than weaker. Your actions tonight, Agent Carter said seriously, represent exactly the kind of thinking that humanity had to overcome to earn that reputation. The question is whether you're willing to become part of the solution, or whether you'll remain part of the problem. Agent Carter closed her tablet and fixed both officers with a stern gaze. The desert around them had grown completely dark now, with only the headlights from the federal vehicles providing illumination. The scene felt surreal, like something from a dream that had taken a serious turn. Officers Morrison and Bennett, Agent Carter said, I need you to understand the full scope of what happened here tonight. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or overzealous policing. Your actions have potentially compromised one of the most important diplomatic missions in human history. Jake felt his throat tighten. We told you, we didn't know. How could we have known? That's exactly the problem, Agent Carter replied. You didn't know, but you acted anyway. You made assumptions about a man based solely on his appearance and decided he didn't belong on that motorcycle. That decision led you to interfere with a classified federal operation. Henry Washington had been listening quietly, but now he stepped forward. Agent Carter, with respect, I think there's something these officers need to understand about the nature of their actions tonight. Go ahead, Colonel, Agent Carter said. Henry looked directly at Jake and Kyle. Gentlemen, let me ask you a question. In your 5 years of police work, how many elderly white men have you pulled over for driving expensive motorcycles? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake shifted uncomfortably. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Henry asked. I was traveling at exactly the speed limit, staying in my lane, wearing proper safety equipment. I violated no traffic laws. So why did you decide to stop me? Kyle opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The honest answer was one he didn't want to admit out loud. You stopped me because you thought an elderly black man didn't belong on a motorcycle like that, Henry continued. You thought it must be stolen, or that I must be involved in something illegal because in your experience people who look like me don't own machines like that. It wasn't about race, Jake protested weakly. Henry opened his wallet and pulled out several credit cards, all platinum or black elite status. I have a PhD in astrophysics from MIT and another in xenobiology from Stanford. I own 3 homes, 4 motorcycles, and a vintage airplane. I've been decorated by 5 different world leaders and have been personally thanked by the Secretary General of the United Nations. But none of that mattered to you tonight, did it? Agent Carter pulled out her tablet again and showed both officers a detailed file. Colonel Washington's net worth is approximately $8 million, earned through military service, consulting fees, and technology patents. His security clearance is higher than mine. He has personally met with alien ambassadors from 14 different species. And yet, Henry added, 2 police officers saw an elderly black man on a motorcycle and immediately assumed I was a criminal. That kind of thinking, officers, is exactly what nearly cost humanity the war against the Harvesters. How so? Kyle asked. The Harvesters made the same mistake you made tonight, Henry explained. They looked at humans and saw a species that was young, technologically inferior, and divided by racial and cultural differences. They assumed we would be easy to conquer because we didn't fit their image of what a warrior species should look like. Agent Carter nodded, but they were wrong. Human diversity turned out to be our greatest strength. Soldiers from different backgrounds brought different perspectives to the war. Problem-solving techniques from one culture were combined with tactical thinking from another. The Harvesters never adapted because they all thought the same way. Your actions tonight represent the kind of thinking that could have gotten humanity exterminated, Henry said bluntly. If human soldiers in space had made assumptions about alien allies based on appearance, we would have lost critical partnerships. If we had dismissed alien intelligence because it came from species that didn't look like us, we would have missed opportunities that saved millions of lives. Jake was beginning to understand the full weight of what had happened. You're saying, our prejudice tonight was the same kind of thinking that could have lost the war. I'm saying your prejudice tonight represents exactly the kind of human weakness that our enemies tried to exploit, Henry replied. The difference is that humanity learned to overcome that weakness during the war. But apparently some individuals still haven't learned the lesson. Agent Carter consulted her watch again. Colonel, we really do need to proceed with the mission. The Vega Collective's ship will be in communication range in 4 hours. Understood, Henry said. He turned back to the officers. Gentlemen, Agent, Carter is right about the federal charges you're facing, but there's something more important at stake here than your careers. What do you mean? Kyle asked. Tomorrow morning, representatives from 12 alien civilizations will arrive to negotiate humanity's entry into the Galactic Trade Consortium, Henry explained. If those negotiations succeed, Earth will gain access to technologies and resources that will solve most of our planet's problems. Clean energy, advanced medicine, faster-than-light communication, even terraforming technology that could give us new worlds to live on. Jake felt the scope of the situation expanding beyond anything he could have imagined. And if the negotiations fail, then humanity remains isolated, Agent Carter said. We keep our current defensive treaties, but we don't advance. We stay confined to Earth and our immediate solar system while other species explore the galaxy and develop technologies we can only dream of. Henry pointed to the device he had retrieved from the crash site. That communication array is programmed with the languages and cultural protocols of all 12 species in the Vega Collective. Without it, we can't even begin the negotiations. Your traffic stop tonight delayed the mission by almost an hour. But you got the equipment, Kyle said hopefully. We got the equipment, Agent Carter confirmed. But the delay meant we had to activate emergency protocols. Federal response teams that were positioned for other missions had to be redirected. Classified communication channels had to be opened that should have remained closed. The entire operation's security profile has been compromised. In military terms, Henry added, your actions tonight forced us to reveal capabilities and resources that were supposed to remain secret. Other alien species that monitor our communications now know more about our defensive capabilities than we wanted them to know. Agent Carter pulled out the handcuffs again. Officers Morrison and Bennett, you are under arrest for violation of Federal Code 182381, obstruction of classified operations, and Federal Code 224429, interference with interstellar diplomatic missions. Wait, Jake said desperately. What can we do to fix this? Henry exchanged a look with Agent Carter. That depends on whether you've learned anything from tonight's conversation. We have, Kyle said quickly. We understand now. We made assumptions, and those assumptions were wrong. More than wrong, Henry corrected. They were dangerous. They were the same kind of thinking that humanity had to overcome to survive as a species. The question is whether you can truly change that thinking, or whether you'll just be more careful about hiding it. Agent Carter studied both officers carefully. There is one option available. The Department of Extraterrestrial Veterans Affairs has a special program for law enforcement officers who have been exposed to classified information. What kind of program? Jake asked. Integration training, Agent Carter replied. 6 months of education about humanity's true place in the galaxy, followed by assignment to federal law enforcement units that handle alien-related incidents. But the training includes intensive psychological evaluation and bias correction protocols. Henry smiled for the first time since the traffic stop began. Officers, you have a choice. You can face federal prosecution for your actions tonight, or you can become part of the solution. But if you choose the training program, you'll never be able to go back to seeing the world the way you did before. Jake and Kyle looked at each other, both realizing that their lives had just reached a crossroads that would determine their entire future. Agent Carter held the handcuffs but did not immediately move to arrest the officers. Instead, she looked at Henry Washington, who was studying both Jake and Kyle, with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating people under pressure. Agent Carter, Henry said quietly, perhaps we should provide these officers with a more complete understanding of the situation before we proceed with arrests. They acted based on incomplete information. The protocols are clear, Colonel Washington, Agent Carter replied. Any interference with classified missions requires immediate detention and federal prosecution. The protocols were written by people who never had to make split-second decisions in the field, Henry said firmly. These men are police officers. They were doing what they thought was right with the information they had. Jake and Kyle stood frozen, realizing that their fate was being decided by two people who operated on a level of authority they had never encountered before. The conversation was taking place over their heads, but it was about their lives and careers. Henry walked over to his motorcycle, which was still parked on the shoulder. He opened one of the modified storage compartments and pulled out what looked like a thick photo album. But when he opened it, both officers could see it contained not family photos, but documentation of things that should not exist. Officers, Henry said, I want to show you something that might help you understand the scope of what we're dealing with. The first page showed a photograph of Henry in military uniform, but it was unlike any uniform Jake or Kyle had ever seen. The material seemed to shift and change in the light, and the insignia were clearly not from any Earth military. Henry looked 20 years younger in the photo, and he was standing in front of what appeared to be a massive spaceship. This was taken aboard the UES Liberty during the Battle of Proxima Station, Henry explained. The ship you see behind me was 3 miles long and carried a crew of 15,000 human soldiers. Kyle stared at the photograph. That's impossible. We don't have ships like that. We do, Henry said simply. We've had them for 20 years. After the war ended, humanity was gifted technology by our alien allies. We built a fleet that now patrols the space around Earth and several nearby star systems. Henry turned the page to show more photographs. Humans in advanced armor fighting, alongside strange alien creatures against other aliens that looked like walking nightmares. Space battles with weapons that fired beams of pure light. Planets with 2 suns and purple skies where human soldiers had planted American flags. The Centauri campaign lasted 3 years, Henry continued. We fought the Harvesters across 12 star systems. Human forces won decisive victories at Alpha Centauri, Wolf 359, and the Vega system. Each victory proved to other alien species that humanity was not to be underestimated. Agent Carter approached and looked over Henry's shoulder at the photographs. Colonel, this level of disclosure is beyond what the situation requires. These men need to understand what they almost interfered with tonight, Henry replied. They need to see the bigger picture. Henry turned to another page showing a group photograph of human soldiers with several alien beings. The aliens were tall and thin, with elongated limbs, but they were clearly allies rather than enemies. They were sharing what appeared to be a meal with the human soldiers, and everyone in the photo was smiling or displaying what could be interpreted as friendly expressions. These are Corellian scouts, Henry explained. They were the first alien species to make peaceful contact with humanity. They had been fighting the Harvesters for decades when we joined the war. Our tactical innovations and determination impressed them so much that they offered to share their technology with us. Jake found his voice. What kind of tactical innovations? Henry smiled, and for the first time since the traffic stop began, he looked genuinely pleased. Humans have a gift for creative problem-solving that most alien species lack. The Harvesters had conquered other worlds by using overwhelming force and superior technology. They never encountered a species that could adapt and improvise the way humans can. Give me an example, Kyle said, his skepticism warring with growing fascination. The Battle of Europa Station, Henry replied without hesitation. The Harvesters had us outnumbered 10-1 and had superior weapons. Standard military doctrine would have called for retreat. Instead, we used their own weapons against them. Henry turned to a page showing technical diagrams that looked like they came from a science fiction movie. We captured several Harvester ships and reverse-engineered their technology in the middle of the battle. Within 6 hours, we had modified our own weapons to use their power sources. The Harvesters had never seen anything like it. Agent Carter checked her watch again. Colonel, we really do need to move. The equipment won't install itself. 5 more minutes, Henry said. He turned to face both officers directly. Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is the most important thing you'll ever hear. The war with the Harvesters wasn't just about Earth. It was about proving that humanity deserved a place in the galactic community. What do you mean? Jake asked. There are hundreds of alien civilizations in our galaxy, Henry explained. Most of them are peaceful, but they're also cautious. When a new species develops space travel, the other civilizations watch to see what kind of neighbors they'll be. Aggressive species like the Harvesters are contained or destroyed. Peaceful species are welcomed. Henry pointed to a star chart in his album that showed dozens of solar systems connected by travel routes. Humanity was being tested. The Harvesters were sent to see how we would respond to an existential threat. Would we surrender? Would we destroy ourselves fighting each other? Or would we unite and prove that we could be valuable allies? And we passed the test? Kyle asked. We exceeded all expectations, Agent Carter interjected. Humans didn't just survive the war. We won it so decisively that several alien species immediately requested formal alliance treaties. Earth is now considered one of the most strategically important planets in this sector of the galaxy. Henry closed the album and looked at both officers seriously. The equipment I retrieved tonight will be used to communicate with the Vega Collective, a group of 12 alien species that wants to establish a formal trade agreement with Earth. The meeting tomorrow could determine whether humanity becomes a major player in galactic commerce or remains a minor protected world. Jake felt overwhelmed by the scope of what he was hearing. And we almost ruined it by pulling you over? You almost ruined it by making assumptions about who belongs where, Henry corrected gently. The same kind of thinking that leads to racial profiling on Earth highways also led the harvesters to underestimate human capabilities. They saw us as primitive and weak because we didn't look like the other species they had conquered. But we proved them wrong, Agent Carter added. And in doing so, we earned the respect of the entire galactic community. The question now is whether individual humans can learn to look beyond surface appearances the way our species had to learn during the war. Henry Washington looked at Jake and Kyle with an expression that mixed disappointment with hope. Officers, you have a choice to make. You can continue to see people as threats based on how they look, or you can learn to see people for who they really are. The choice you make will determine whether you're part of humanity's future among the stars or part of its past on this one small planet. Agent Carter motioned for Jake and Kyle to follow her away from the vehicles, where they could speak more privately. The other federal agents had formed a security perimeter around Henry and his motorcycle, but their posture was protective rather than threatening. It was clear they were guarding him, not guarding against him. Officers, Agent Carter began, what I'm about to explain to you will fundamentally change your understanding of the world we live in. 23 years ago, Earth was contacted by an aggressive alien species that viewed our planet as a resource to be harvested. They had conquered dozens of other worlds and expected humanity to surrender without resistance. Jake felt like he was dreaming. This conversation could not be happening on a routine traffic stop in the middle of Arizona. You're serious about this? Completely serious, Agent Carter replied. The aliens, we call them the harvesters, had superior technology and numbers. By all military logic, humanity should have been extinct within months of first contact. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated human determination and adaptability. Kyle looked over at Henry Washington, who was now examining some kind of device that one of the federal agents had given him. The old man handled the technology with familiar ease, like someone who had used similar equipment many times before. Mr. Washington was one of our first volunteers for the Deep Space Reconnaissance Program, Agent Carter continued. We needed soldiers who could adapt quickly to alien environments and technology. We needed people who could think creatively under impossible pressure. Henry and soldiers like him saved our species. How is this possible? Jake asked. If there was an alien invasion, how come nobody knows about it? Agent Carter smiled grimly. Because the invasion never reached Earth's surface. Our forces met them in the outer solar system and in space around other star systems. The war was fought in places where normal civilians would never see it. And when it was over, the government decided that public knowledge of alien contact would cause more harm than good. So you've been covering it up for 20 years? Kyle asked. We've been protecting public stability, Agent Carter corrected. The average person isn't ready to know that Earth is part of a larger galactic community. But veterans like Henry continue to serve as liaisons and security for ongoing alien contact operations. Jake was struggling to process everything he was hearing. Ongoing contact? You mean there are still aliens coming to Earth? Friendly aliens, Agent Carter clarified. The war with the harvesters established humanity's reputation in the galaxy. Other species now view humans as valuable allies rather than easy targets. We have regular diplomatic and trade relationships with several alien civilizations. Agent Carter pulled out a tablet device and showed the officers what appeared to be satellite imagery of the Phoenix area. But the display showed information that no civilian satellite could detect. There were markers indicating contact zones, alien technology sites, and federal response teams scattered across the map. Mr. Washington's mission tonight was to retrieve communication equipment from a crashed alien probe about 30 miles from here, Agent Carter explained. The probe was damaged during atmospheric entry and landed in the desert 3 days ago. We need that equipment for a diplomatic meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. Kyle stared at the tablet display. There are alien crash sites all over Arizona. All over the world, Agent Carter replied. Most are routine deliveries or minor accidents. We have recovery teams that handle these situations quietly and efficiently. The public sees meteor showers or military exercises. In reality, we're maintaining constant contact with our galactic neighbors. Jake looked back at Henry Washington with new understanding. The elderly man who had seemed like an easy target was actually one of Earth's greatest heroes. What exactly did he do during the war? Agent Carter's expression became more serious. Henry led the team that captured the first Harvester command ship. The intelligence we gained from that operation allowed us to turn the tide of the war. He personally defeated 3 Harvester battle commanders in single combat and developed the tactical doctrine that other human forces use to win decisive victories. Single combat? Kyle asked. Against aliens? The Harvesters had a warrior culture that respected individual strength and courage, Agent Carter explained. Henry challenged their commanders to personal duels to avoid large-scale battles that would have cost thousands of human lives. He won every single fight. Jake felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had stopped this man because he thought an elderly black man on a motorcycle looked suspicious. In reality, Henry Washington had risked his life repeatedly to save every person on Earth. "Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning?" Jake asked. "Because the information is classified," Agent Carter replied. "Your security clearance levels don't permit access to extraterrestrial defense information. Even now, you're only hearing this because your actions tonight have compromised an active mission." That statement hit both officers like a physical blow. "Compromised how?" Kyle asked. Agent Carter checked her watch and frowned. "Mr. Washington was supposed to retrieve the alien communication equipment and return to base by 2100 hours tonight. Your traffic stop has delayed him by 47 minutes. The alien delegation he's supposed to communicate with will arrive in 6 hours, and we may not have their equipment ready in time." Jake felt his stomach drop. "We've caused an international incident?" "Interstellar incident," Agent Carter corrected. "The aliens we're meeting with tomorrow are from a species that values punctuality and precision above all else. If we're not ready to communicate with them properly, they may decide that humans are unreliable partners." Henry Washington approached their group, carrying a silver device about the size of a briefcase. His motorcycle was now being loaded onto a transport trailer by the federal agents. "Agent Carter," Henry said, "I've retrieved the primary communication array from the crash site. The delay won't affect tomorrow's meeting, but we need to move now to complete the setup." Agent Carter nodded and turned back to the officers. "Gentlemen, this brings us to the serious part of this conversation. Your actions tonight have violated several federal laws regarding interference with classified operations." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "We were just doing our jobs." "I understand that," Agent Carter said. "But ignorance of classified operations is not a legal defense for compromising national security. Mr. Washington's mission was time-sensitive and critical to Earth's diplomatic relationships." Kyle looked desperately between Agent Carter and Henry Washington. "We didn't know. How could we have known?" Henry Washington stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Kyle's shoulder. "Son, you couldn't have known. That's the point of classified operations. But your decision to stop me wasn't based on any actual suspicious activity. You stopped me because you made assumptions about who I was based on how I looked." The truth of Henry's words hit both officers hard. They had stopped him, not because he was breaking any laws, but because they thought an elderly black man didn't belong on an expensive motorcycle. "That kind of thinking," Henry continued, "is exactly what the aliens we fought against used to justify their actions. They saw humans as inferior based on our appearance and technology. They thought we would be easy to defeat because we didn't look like warriors to them." Agent Carter pulled out a set of handcuffs. "Officers Morrison and Bennett, you are under arrest for obstruction of federal operations and breach of interstellar security protocols." The approaching headlights were still several miles away when Henry Washington's phone began to ring. The device made a sound unlike any ringtone either officer had ever heard. It was a series of soft tones that seemed to come from multiple directions, at once creating an almost musical harmony in the desert air. Henry answered the phone with a simple, "Washington here." Jake and Kyle could hear a voice on the other end, but the words were unclear. What they could make out sounded like technical jargon mixed with military terminology. Henry listened carefully, occasionally responding with confirmed or understood. "Command? I need to update my status," Henry said into the phone. Civilian contact has extended beyond normal parameters. 2 local officers are requesting verification of my credentials. I estimate federal response will arrive in approximately 10 minutes. The voice on the other end spoke for nearly a minute, without interruption. Henry's expression grew more serious as he listened. I understand the time sensitivity, Henry replied. But the situation is contained. The officers are following proper protocols and I have maintained cover identity. The mission can proceed as planned once federal clearance is provided. Kyle moved closer, trying to hear more of the conversation. He caught fragments that made no sense in any normal context. Words like orbital window, beacon activation, and contact protocol drifted from the phone's speaker. Negative, Command, Henry said firmly. I will not compromise cover for schedule considerations. The mission parameters were clear about civilian exposure protocols. We proceed by the book or not at all. Jake found himself impressed by Henry's commanding tone. Whatever organization this man worked for, he clearly held significant authority within it. This was not the voice of someone taking orders, but someone who was used to giving them. The voice on the phone spoke again, and Henry's expression softened slightly. Tell my daughter I'll be home late tonight, but that everything is fine. Yes, she can go ahead and have dinner without me. I'll call her directly once the situation is resolved. That part of the conversation sounded completely normal, and it reminded both officers that despite all the strangeness surrounding Henry Washington, he was still a grandfather going home from visiting his grandson's grave. Affirmative, Command. Nomad 7 maintaining position and awaiting federal assistance. Washington out. Henry closed the phone and looked at the 2 officers. Gentlemen, I apologize for the inconvenience this is causing you. I know this situation is unusual, but everything will be explained shortly. Mr. Washington, Jake said, I have to ask, what exactly do you do for the government? Henry considered his answer carefully. I'm what you might call a specialist consultant. When the government needs someone with my particular background and experience, they call me. Tonight was supposed to be personal time, but sometimes personal and professional overlap. What kind of specialist? Kyle pressed. The kind that deals with situations most people prefer not to think about, Henry replied. Threats that exist beyond the normal scope of local law enforcement. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening air. What kind of threats? Before Henry could answer, his phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. Washington. Yes, I can see them now. In the distance, the headlights had resolved into 3 black SUVs moving in tight formation. They were traveling fast but not recklessly, maintaining perfect spacing as they approached the traffic stop. Command, federal response has arrived. I am terminating civilian communications and switching to secure channel. Henry touched something on the side of his phone, and the device's display changed completely. Instead of showing normal phone menus, it now displayed what looked like a tactical communication interface with multiple channels, GPS coordinates, and status indicators that Jake recognized from military movies. This is Nomad 7 switching to TAC Channel Alpha. Federal team, please confirm your identity and authorization codes. A new voice came through the phone's speaker, crisp and professional. Nomad 7, this is Federal Response Team Delta. Authorization code Sierra 77 Tango November. Agent Carter commanding. Confirmed, Agent Carter. 2 civilian officers on scene, both cooperative. No hostile activity. Recommend standard briefing protocol for local law enforcement. Copy. Nomad 7. We are taking control of the scene now. Please maintain position and prepare for debrief. The 3 SUVs pulled up behind the police patrol car in a coordinated formation. Jake could see that all the vehicles had government plates, but the agency designation was not one he recognized. Instead of FBI or DEA, the plates simply read, Diva. Men and women in dark suits emerged from the vehicles with the fluid precision of a well-trained team. They moved with the confidence of federal agents, but there was something different about them. Their equipment was standard government issue, but some of the devices they carried looked more advanced than anything Jake had seen local FBI agents use. The lead agent approached the police car where Jake and Kyle were standing. She was a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. Her badge identified her as Special Agent Lisa Carter. "Officers," Agent Carter said. "I'm Agent Carter with the Department of Extraterrestrial Veterans Affairs. I need to speak with you about the man you've stopped." Jake blinked hard, certain he had misheard. "Did you say Extraterrestrial Veterans Affairs?" "That's correct," Agent Carter replied calmly. "Mr. Washington is a decorated veteran of classified military operations. Your database query triggered security protocols that require federal intervention." Kyle looked back and forth between Agent Carter and Henry Washington, who was now talking quietly with two other federal agents beside his motorcycle. "What kind of classified operations?" Agent Carter studied both officers carefully as if evaluating how much they could handle. "Officers, what I'm about to tell you is classified information that you will be required to keep confidential. Do you understand the serious nature of what I'm saying?" Both officers nodded, though Jake felt his mouth going dry with nervousness. "Mr. Washington is a veteran of humanity's first interstellar military conflict," Agent Carter said. "He served with distinction in operations that took place beyond Earth's solar system. The conflict ended 20 years ago, but veterans like Mr. Washington continue to serve in advisory and liaison roles." Jake stared at Agent Carter, waiting for her to crack a smile or admit she was joking. When neither happened, he felt the world tilt slightly around him. "You're saying he fought aliens?" Kyle asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying he fought for humanity's survival," Agent Carter replied. "And he won." Officer Jake Morrison stared at the red warning message on his computer screen and felt his hands start to shake slightly. In 5 years of police work, he had run thousands of license checks, but nothing had ever come back with a federal classification warning. He read the message again, hoping he had misunderstood something, but the words remained the same. Kyle Bennett was studying Henry's license under the dome light in their patrol car. The more he looked at it, the more confused he became. The holographic elements were unlike anything he had seen on government documents. When he tilted the license, small symbols seemed to move across the surface like tiny stars. The material felt warm to the touch, almost alive. "Jake, this license is seriously weird," Kyle said. "Feel this material. It's like nothing I've ever touched." Jake took the license and immediately understood what Kyle meant. The document felt substantial but impossibly thin, like it was made from some kind of advanced polymer. The surface had a subtle texture that seemed to change under his fingers. When he held it up to the light, he could see layers of information embedded deep within the material itself. "Look at his service record," Kyle said, pointing to a section of the license. "It lists his military service, but I've never heard of these units." Jake squinted at the tiny print. Under military service, Henry's license listed several assignments that made no sense. 47th Deep Space Reconnaissance Battalion, Centauri, Theater Operations, Interstellar Defense Corps, and Galactic Liaison Division. The dates showed service from 2005 to 2025, but the unit sounded like something from a science fiction movie. "Deep Space Reconnaissance?" Jake said. "What the hell is that supposed to mean? And what's the Centauri Theater?" "There's no military theater called Centauri." Kyle was examining the registration papers with equal confusion. The vehicle description was even stranger than the license. Instead of listing the motorcycle as a standard Harley-Davidson, the registration described it as a modified surface transport with integrated communication array. The engine was listed as Hybrid Plasma Chemical Propulsion System. "This has to be fake," Kyle said. "Plasma propulsion system on a motorcycle? This guy is running some kind of elaborate scam." But even as he said it, Kyle wasn't entirely convinced. The documents looked and felt completely authentic. The paper quality and printing were far superior to any fake documents he had ever seen. If these were forgeries, they were the most sophisticated forgeries ever created. Jake tried running Henry's name through different databases: military records, criminal history, outstanding warrants. Everything came back with the same red warning message. It was as if Henry Washington existed in some kind of classified bubble that local law enforcement was not allowed to access. "I'm calling this in," Jake said, reaching for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need a supervisor and federal contact for a Code Black classification issue." The radio crackled back immediately. Unit 47, did you say code black? Please confirm. Confirmed, dispatch. We have a subject with federal classification documents. Computer is showing immediate. Federal contact required. Unit 47, maintain your position. Do not question or detain the subject. Federal response is en route. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. Jake and Kyle looked at each other with growing concern. Code Black was reserved for terrorist threats and national security issues. Neither officer had ever been involved in a Code Black situation before. Meanwhile, Henry Washington remained seated on his motorcycle, appearing completely calm and patient. He had finished his phone call and was now simply waiting. Occasionally, he would glance at his watch or look up at the darkening sky, but he showed no signs of stress or concern about the situation. Jake decided to try one more approach. He walked back to Henry's motorcycle, still carrying the strange documents, Mr. Washington, Jake said carefully. We're having some difficulty verifying your information. Can you tell me more about your military service? Henry smiled politely. I served my country for 20 years, officer. Most of my service record is classified for national security reasons. I'm not permitted to discuss the details with unauthorized personnel. What do you mean by unauthorized personnel? Kyle asked, joining them. We're police officers. I understand that, Henry said, but your security clearance level isn't high enough for the information in my file. The federal authorities who are coming will be able to verify everything. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. How do you know federal authorities are coming? Henry gestured toward his cell phone. I called my command when you stopped me. It's standard procedure for any civilian contact situation. They track all of our movements for security purposes. Your command? Kyle asked. You said you were retired. Retired from active duty, Henry corrected, but veterans of certain classified programs remain under federal oversight for life. It's for everyone's protection. Jake looked more closely at the motorcycle Henry was riding. In the dim light, he could see that it had been modified in subtle ways. There were small antennas and devices mounted in places where they wouldn't be immediately visible. The exhaust system looked different from a standard Harley, and there were ports and connections that didn't belong on a normal motorcycle. What, are all these modifications on your bike? Jake asked. Henry followed his gaze and nodded. Communication equipment mostly, GPS tracking, emergency beacon, encrypted radio. When you've served in the places I've served, you learn to stay connected to your people. Kyle studied Henry's face carefully. The old man seemed completely sincere, but the story he was telling sounded impossible. Military veterans with lifetime federal oversight, classified service records, motorcycles with space-age modifications. It all sounded like the plot of a bad movie. But the computer warning had been real. The strange documents were real, and somewhere in the distance Kyle could now hear the sound of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed. Mr. Washington, Jake said, I have to ask you directly. Are you involved in anything illegal? Drugs, weapons, terrorism? Henry looked genuinely surprised by the question. Officer, I've spent my entire adult life serving and protecting this country. I've fought enemies you can't imagine in places you've never heard of. I've seen things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. But I have never, not once, done anything to harm my fellow Americans or betray the oath I swore when I first put on a uniform. There was something in Henry's voice when he said those words that made both officers believe him completely. This was not the voice of a criminal or a con artist. This was the voice of a man who had seen combat, who had faced death, who had earned the right to speak with absolute authority about duty and honor. The sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder. Jake could see headlights in the distance, moving much faster than normal traffic. Multiple vehicles, probably SUVs, heading directly toward their location. Looks like your federal friends are almost here, Kyle said. Henry nodded and checked his watch again. Right on schedule. They take response times very seriously. Jake felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. Whatever was about to happen, he had the feeling that his quiet evening patrol was about to become the most significant event of his police career. The sun was setting over the Arizona highway when Officer Jake Morrison spotted the motorcycle in his rearview mirror. The old Harley-Davidson was moving at exactly 65 miles per hour, keeping perfect pace with traffic. Behind the handlebars sat an elderly black man wearing a worn leather jacket and faded jeans. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and despite his age, he sat straight and confident on the powerful machine. Jake nudged his partner, Kyle Bennett, and pointed at the bike. "Look at that old timer on the Harley, probably stolen." Kyle glanced over and shrugged. "He's not doing anything wrong. Speed's good, staying in his lane. Come on, when's the last time you saw someone like him on a bike like that? Probably drugs or something. Let's check him out." The elderly rider noticed the police car falling back behind him. He had been expecting this for the last 10 miles. It always happened the same way. Two officers, usually young, usually looking for easy trouble. He sighed and prepared himself for another encounter with people who saw only what they wanted to see. Jake hit the lights and sirens. The motorcycle immediately began to slow down and moved toward the shoulder. No sudden movements, no attempt to run, just a calm and controlled response to the police signal. The rider brought his bike to a stop on the gravel shoulder and turned off the engine. He removed his helmet and placed it on the seat beside him, then sat still with his hands visible on the handlebars. Both officers approached the motorcycle with their hands resting on their weapons. The elderly man watched them in his mirrors, but did not turn around. He had learned long ago that any movement could be seen as threatening by nervous officers. "Good evening, sir," Jake said as he reached the bike. "I'm Officer Morrison. This is Officer Bennett. Can I see your license and registration, please?" The elderly man turned slowly and smiled. His voice was calm and polite. "Good evening, officers. Of course, I'm Henry Washington. Let me get my documents for you." Henry reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate, slow movements. He pulled out a wallet that looked ordinary enough, but when he opened it, both officers noticed something strange. The material felt different when Henry handed over his license. It was thin like paper but seemed impossibly durable, almost like metal. The surface had a slight shimmer that caught the light in unusual ways. Kyle took the registration papers and frowned. The documents had the same strange quality as the license. The printing was crisp and clear, but there were symbols and markings along the edges that neither officer recognized. The paper seemed to have depth to it, as if the text was floating just below the surface. "Where are you heading tonight, Mr. Washington?" Jake asked, studying the license carefully. "Home to Tucson," Henry replied. "I was visiting my grandson's grave in Flagstaff. He passed away 2 years ago." Jake felt a small pang of guilt, but pushed it aside. Something was definitely odd about this man's documents. "What did you do for work, sir?" Henry paused for just a moment. "I was in the military, retired lieutenant colonel. I served in reconnaissance, mostly overseas assignments." "Which branch?" Kyle asked, looking up from the registration. "That's classified," Henry said with a gentle smile. "Even in retirement, some things stay classified." The officers exchanged glances. Classified military service was not unheard of, but something about Henry's documents was bothering them. Jake decided to run the information through their computer system. "We're going to verify your information, sir. Please stay with your bike." Henry nodded and remained seated on his motorcycle. He watched the officers walk back to their patrol car and knew what would happen next. The database search would trigger protocols that had been in place for 20 years. Soon, very soon, these two young men would learn that the world was much larger and more complicated than they had ever imagined. As Jake typed Henry's information into the computer, he noticed more strange details on the license. The photo looked normal enough, but there were small holographic elements that seemed to move when he tilted the card. Security features like this were common on new licenses, but Henry's documents looked both old and impossibly advanced at the same time. Kyle studied the registration papers more carefully. Listed under vehicle class was a designation he had never seen before. Instead of motorcycle, it read Surface Transport Unit, Class 7. The VIN number was longer than normal and contained letters that didn't appear in standard vehicle identification numbers. "This is weird, Jake," Kyle said, holding up the registration. "Look at this vehicle classification, and this VIN number doesn't match any format I've ever seen." Jake finished entering the information and hit the search button. For a few seconds, the screen showed the normal processing message. Then suddenly, the display changed to solid red with white text that made both officers sit up straight. Classified. Contact federal authority immediately. Do not detain. Do not question. Await federal response. Below the warning message was a phone number with instructions to call within 60 seconds of receiving this alert. Jake stared at the screen in disbelief. In 5 years of police work, he had never seen anything like this. "Kyle, look at this," Jake said, his voice tight with concern. Kyle leaned over and read the message. His face went pale. "What the hell? Who is this guy?" Meanwhile, Henry Washington sat quietly on his motorcycle, checking his watch. The evening air was cool, and he could smell the desert sage growing along the roadside. In the distance, he could see the lights of Phoenix beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. He had been through this routine before, though not recently. Most local law enforcement had learned to leave veterans of his particular service alone. But sometimes new officers or officers in remote areas still made the mistake of stopping them. Henry reached into his other pocket and pulled out what looked like a normal cell phone. But as he powered it on, the display showed coordinates instead of a phone number. He pressed a single button and waited for the connection. "Command, this is Nomad 7, he said quietly into the phone. "I have a civilian contact situation on Highway 17, approximately 15 miles south of Flagstaff. 2 local officers. Please advise." The response came immediately. "Copy Nomad 7. Federal response is already en route. Maintain cover protocols. Do not reveal classification unless authorized by federal command." Henry closed the phone and put it back in his pocket. The officers were still in their car, probably trying to figure out what to do about the computer warning. He could see them making phone calls and having an animated discussion. Soon, very soon, their quiet evening would become much more complicated than either of them had planned.